Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. If 2012 were the opening act to a three-act play called The Evolution of Planet Earth, then the year 2020 is looking very much like scene one of Act 2, which is traditionally when the stakes get raised, equilibrium gives way to chaos, and the metaphorical clanging of the all-change bell is getting too loud to ignore. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? But with astrology pointing to 2020 as a pivotal year in the history of humanity, the analogy of a three-act play is not so far off the mark. For according to astrological consultant Alison Chester-Lambert, who was the resident astrologer on BBC TV's Daily Politics show and is a regular contributor to the UK's Daily Mail Online, the events of 2012 were merely a warm-up for a much bigger tidal wave of change that's heading our way. Alison Chester-Lambert joins me now to provide her cosmic insight on what is likely to happen when Saturn and Pluto finally come together in January of next year, and the coming clash between the masculine, yang, and the feminine, yin planets start pulling duality apart. Alison Chester-Lambert, welcome back to the show.
Oh, hello. Hi, Sandie. I'm so pleased and thrilled to be here. And that sounded so fascinating. I'm going to sit and listen to this show myself.
No, you can't. You've got to talk.
I was thinking, that's right, that's great, that's right, that's good.
Well, it's not good, actually. I mean,
well, it depends which side you're sitting on. But anyway,
Yeah, well, I think, whether we're in the USA or the UK, and, we have a bulk of our audience in the USA, and you and I are both currently in the UK, I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference. But let's start off a little bit about, you talk about the events of 2012 when everybody was expecting either Armageddon or, hey, the spaceship's landed and off we go to Hallelujah Land. And we didn't get either. And you say that those events, or whichever events occurred then, what we were expecting then was merely a warm-up for a much bigger thing, a tidal wave of change that we're going to see next year, and that we have mega astrology coming along that carries several critical messages. Before we talk about the messages, tell me, why and how does 2020 link to 2012?
Okay, so what happened was the planets Uranus and Pluto went to a 90-degree angle to each other in 2012. And then they started a dance that came in, went out, came in, went out, just like the players on a stage. Very good analogy. And it was one of the longest-running clashes of Uranus and Pluto. We had 7 hits in all, and went all the way from 2012 through to 2016. So although I saw 2012 as an opener, because we got the first hit then I couldn't see how that was the closing, because it's going on, the planets are going on and doing this until 2016. So surely 2012 was just opening. And I think if we look back now, what we're able to see is that things like the Arab Spring started then, but they are still running now. If you look at Syria, that this is simply one more country in the Arab Spring. These things have been passed and rippled around the Middle East. So that's why sort of in astrology we got that opening of the Uranus-Pluto square, but then Pluto now has gone on. remained in Capricorn, but is now going on to join Saturn, or Saturn's joining Pluto. And so we get this sort of like, it's like being part of an orchestral piece where, you know, different instruments are coming in, but it's all part of that same wonderful piece of music.
And the angles are important, are they?
Yeah, because what we know from tradition is that where we divide the circle of 360 degrees into, say, 30, 60, 90, 120, we tend to use 30-degree sections, then we know that some of these angles can be very active, antagonistic, or require action, and then others of these angles can be very harmonious and very sort of facilitating. So the square is considered to be one of the most, how can I put this, the most exciting ones to look at.
Exciting, challenging. Yes,
yeah,
come on.
Yeah.
I know you like to put a positive spin on everything.
Yeah. Well, what I always say in astrology is when our back is against the wall and we have to take actions we never thought we'd take, the square tends to push things through with a lot of violence, and so you get this analogy of being boxed into a corner and then fighting against it and pushing out. I think it's worth pointing out that the planet Pluto is a feminine planet, a water planet, and the planet Uranus is an air planet, a masculine planet. And so the water feminine yin of Pluto was really against the masculine yang air of Uranus. And the Uranus was fighting for technology and forward thinking, growth, you know, really fighting to get into the future in this fabulous sort of like run of growth. And Pluto was really fighting to think more about nature, to think more about the feminine, to think more about the slow evolution versus the fast revolution of Uranus.
You know, Pluto's also digging up the underworld in a way, isn't it? Very much so. And it's interesting that for the last 10 years or more, I seem to be speaking to one person or another about, you know, Saturn and Pluto and the things that they've been doing. And it's interesting that Trump used the phrase that he was going to drain the swamp. All of these, you know, words have been used that really typify, you know, what these planets are about.
Absolutely, yes. And another analogy to look at with the underworld is, I think, the quantum realm. And I think the quantum realm really holds divinity at its heart. I think the fire, the flash, the electricity is very much how a certain section of divinity, let's call it the fire element, works. And so when we're working with that energy, I think what we get is we get an ability to co-create, we get flashes of inspiration, we get flashes of gut instinct, etc. And so I very much like to think that we are, as we ascend, if you like, a slow ascension in a spiral, I guess, I like to think that we are becoming more capable individually and collectively of getting in touch with these flashes of inspiration, this gut instinct, this bright, sudden inspiration, this ingenuity, which is all masculine. So it's, yeah, some of it's good, but yeah, it can be quite a ride.
Yes, it can be. And these things that you're talking about, are these the critical messages that the astrology next year is going to be bringing us?
Right. Well, what's happened is because Uranus has parted company with Pluto now and gone into Taurus, which is an earth energy, a feminine energy, what that indicates in astrology is that the earth is sort of enveloping or holding back or not allowing Uranus to have this really free energy anymore. Uranus is encased, incarcerated in the earth, if you see what I mean. So the earth is now going to have her say about how much he's allowed to do. So we therefore see that the players left on the stage, if we keep going back to that analogy, are largely feminine planets. So we've got a couple of dwarf planets in there that have only recently been discovered this century, Haumea and Eris, and we've got Pluto still in there. But these are all working predominantly on an axis zodiac signs, where we have Capricorn on one side and Cancer on the other. So a water sign and an earth sign, but still feminine yin. And so we've got the feminine planets of Pluto and Saturn in there. Saturn is an earth planet. And so what we tend to see, if we're looking at the chart for next year, we tend to see the weighting of the feminine. And the feminine is playing a very strong part for next year. And so when you look at Uranus and how powerful it's been, and then you look at the movement into a much more feminine energy, what you get a sense of is the tipping of the scales from a largely futuristic, very technologically driven collective into a more earth-driven, more feminine-driven collective for next year.
People have been talking for some time about the rise of the feminine. Is this what we're going to see? And if it is, what does that look like?
Well, yes, exactly. What does it look like? I think as far as astrology is concerned, then yes, we could look at next year as the tipping point to the rise of the feminine. I think if we're looking for astrological indicators, they are all in there. But I think the actual turn of the tide is kind of like stopping an ocean liner, that massive, great ship, mid-ocean. So I think it takes probably a decade before we can look back and see the changes that have occurred. Now, there are some feminine issues coming up here. So, for instance, the LGBT community, I know that they're probably not getting quite the prominence and the respect that we're giving them in the UK. But nevertheless, in Europe and for many people, it's lovely to see the rise of an acceptance of different kinds of sexuality and gender orientation, etc., all very feminine stuff. So I can see the feminine rising, and I think that what we need to be able to allow us to think about is okay, it's rising, but it's not going to happen in a day. We're not going to see one event where we think, okay, well, that was it. The feminine is now ruling. Long live the feminine. I think it's much more a case of the rise of women who tend to represent the feminine and other things coming in, much more planetary attention, much more attention going to the planet because of the weather. Our planet Gaia is a feminine entity. So I think we're seeing the rise of the feminine, and when we look back in a few years, we'll say, hey, 2020 was pivotal. We didn't realize it then. And so I think we can see it like that. But I think also we're looking at the feminine structures. So the feminine is about structures, institutions, matter, material things. And the presence of Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn and Jupiter joining them for a while, that also sets this year, the 2020, apart from all the others. That is one huge collection of very powerful planets, and they're telling a story as well.
You've talked about the masculine yang and the feminine yin, and there's going to be a clash as the duality pulls apart. And yet, you just mentioned the rise of the LGBTQ. We're getting so much more inclusive when it comes to sexuality, and yet we're doing just the opposite when it comes to colour and religion. It's a bit like a seesaw, isn't it?
Maybe we need the chaos of diverse principles, morals, and beliefs in all these invisible ethics and beliefs. Maybe we need to be tossing them up and around, because it's when we toss them around, we begin to get new perspectives. We begin to see new glimpses. We may be looking through a kaleidoscope, if you like, looking at all those different patterns and colors and potentials, possibilities. Maybe we're not so flatly scared or feared or scared or in fear of these things. I think when the pendulum swings one way, it can swing the other. I think it's great that we are bringing these things to the surface, that we're examining them, that we're bringing them into the collective, and people are making decisions and reviewing the potentials of diversity. Diversity in the UK is probably, I don't know if it's ahead of the USA, but I would say that we are really, really moving ground when it comes to diversity. Every year we're doing better and better and better at it.
So tell me about the, if the rise of the feminine continues, how does that affect the way we move through our lives? What will we be witnessing more of and less of?
I think one of the things that we're most likely to notice is contraction, a slowing down, a shrinkage. In general, when we look at masculine and feminine, so maybe I should just start from the beginning. So the cosmos is a whole, and we then look at it as having two polarities, masculine and feminine. So that's like the emitter or the receiver. So the dark and the light. We see that spiritually, the universe or the cosmos is divided into these two polarities initially, and then from the two polarities, we get two elements on each side, so a total of four elements. So in looking at the masculine and feminine, what the feminine is reclusive. It pulls in. It's like gravity. Masculine exudes outward, pushes outwards like radiation, electromagnetic radiation. So you're always going to get the outward forward movement of masculinity and then the pulling in and the contraction of the feminine. And the feminine does that for the purposes of reflection, review, gestation, to mull over something, to consider it, to give it more attention. But it does it in a quiet way. It takes it within and withdraws to do it. So it's like breathing in and out. So I think if we have had this couple of decades, if not more, of relentless growth, I mean, fueled by technology, communication, etc., then it stands to reason if we're in a cycle, if we're going into a feminine part of the cycle, what stands to reason is that we will come across a contraction. The feminine naturally will pull in because the feminine wants to work more slowly and it wants to consider what the masculine has just brought home. So the feminine, I think, will cause a contraction of things like money markets, banking stuff and all the rest of it. That's what I think we will see. So
would you anticipate a recession or certainly a financial?
I think so.
Dip?
Yeah, I do think so. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's part of a healthy cycle, like a spiral of general overall growth, if we're looking over a century, for instance. But I think within that growth over a century, there has to be a cyclical or a spiral growth, so that it's not always just a straight line, so that then you get the curve of the feminine coming back in for consideration. So, yes, I do think that we will get that. And strangely, actually, when I started to talk about this online, I got more support for it than I thought I would. So I got people going, yes, I'm ready for it. It's almost as if we're mentally exhausted and people know, actually, I do need to slow down. I do need to go into the winter, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah. The thing, though, is many people contract and go into fear. It's one thing to go into the winter and welcome it as a respite. It's quite another to go into it, really terrified of what you're going to have to endure.
Yeah, but if we're spiritual people, then we are sort of obliged to understand that this is how the cosmos works, that it is made of a duality. There is nothing to fear in the cycles of winter and summer and winter and summer. So, all right, so we've been through winters and so we don't fear them anymore. And I think a lot of people listening will remember the recession in the 90s, for instance. There is a lot of positive things that can be gained in recession. If we're not always tasked to be on a multiple amount of platforms all the time, for instance, we've got to go between Messenger and WhatsApp and then Facebook and then Twitter. And if we're not tasked to do that, if some of those things are reduced, then we actually get more time to spend on the 1 or 2 rather than spreading ourselves between the 8. So if you think of it in that way, so what if you were to spend more time in the evening just crocheting or knitting or reading a book? When did anybody sit and read a book recently? It's quite hard, isn't it? So I think...
Not for me.
I think there is a... Of course, yes. I was a reviewer of books, sorry. The rest of us did. I think there is a spiritual experience and wisdom to be gained from having the feminine cycle and doing whatever it is that slows us down, contracts us, pulls us in, because it is a time of gestation. It's a time of using that has recently been delivered to us, but making more sense of it. So I think if people are in fear over that, I don't think they need to be. I think we're all in charge of our own responses. And although that might be a knee-jerk reaction, I think genuinely, and I really do believe this from the heart, it is good to have contraction. It is good to have slowdown. And I think when we think about it, we can probably find some very useful things we can do.
Well, on that positive note, we're going to have a little contraction of our own and go to break. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. My guest today is author and professional astrological consultant and teacher, Alison Chester-Lambert. And we're taking a peek at what the astrology can tell us about Boris, Trump, Brexit, the economy, the next US presidential election, and everything else that might be on the table when Saturn finally conjuncts Pluto in January 2020. We'll be back after the break.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
I'm Fidel Mshombo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America, and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Alison Chester-Lambert. With Brexit and the next US presidential election still hogging the headlines and dividing people everywhere, it's odds on that Boris and Donald are two names that we're going to continue to hear a lot of in the year ahead. Have you looked into both these people's charts? Can you give us any glimpses of what's going on with them and therefore us?
I actually find it quite fascinating, first of all, that we managed to get a character of our own, a divisive character of our own. And I just think, you know, we couldn't leave the USA all on its own with a divisive character. We had to get our own. We have to join in. I suppose the short answer is no. I haven't compared their charts. No, I haven't. But what I do think is that they are mouthpieces for nations that are expressing this separation of the feminine and the masculine. When I say the separation of the feminine and the masculine, what I mean is that we are at a point where the feminine has to take a greater role. And so instead of the feminine just going along with or agreeing with the masculine, what I think we're going to be seeing is the feminine taking more of a prominent role. And so therefore, when I say they're sort of dividing, I think they're becoming more obviously, distinctly separate and different. And so therefore, in order for us to get experience of this distinctly different, what we have to have is some kind of theme, some kind of subject that will divide a nation, because then we're going to get two sides. And then we're going to understand the two sides of masculine and feminine. It's like two jigsaw pieces, one with the one with the knobbly bit and one with the hole. They're different, but they do fit together at when they're getting on nicely in jigsaw puzzle. But I think that's what we're looking at.
I tell you what I notice, and this just amuses me no end. I mean, here we are with Boris and Donald. They're both big, flabby men. They're both blonde. They both, profess to be very macho, but, there's a lot about them that's quite feminine, sort of soft and flaccid in many respects. We've got Brexit, and we've got, with our wall, the Irish wall that is just, constantly in the way, whether we're going to have it, whether we're not. We've got the Mexico wall. We've got the party divisions here, caused by Brexit. We've got the divisions between the Democrats and the GOP, and that kind of chasm is getting wider and wider. That I just find it fascinating that these things, talk about clarity. We've got these two things, both exactly the same, happening at opposite ends of the world.
Absolutely, yes, definitely. I'll just explain for those people that don't know it. I'll try to give a very short history. So the island of Ireland and the island of England and Wales and Scotland were, in the 1900s, were sort of one nation. And then in 1922, Southern Ireland, most of Ireland, wanted to pull away from Great Britain. And after 3 years of war or so, it did indeed pull away and became an independent state eventually, although 6 counties, if you like, in the north of Ireland remained with Great Britain. So the United Kingdom is actually Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, that happened in 1922, and if this is interesting, I don't know, it fascinates me. But what happened was, in astrology, we were all taught to use a chart for the UK, which was brought about in 1801. So we're all using this 1801 chart for the UK. But I started to recognise in the last year or two that it doesn't work anymore. The stuff happening in the UK was not there in the chart. So I sort of looked through it, and I found out that actually we should be using a 1922 chart, because that is the time that the United Kingdom was formed. So that's the 3 countries of the Main Island, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's the United Kingdom. And it's interesting that chart came into existence because of the Irish and Ireland. That chart is now working fantastically. It's got tremendous symmetry with the chart for the USA. So it shows a huge mirroring of the 2 countries and a lot of similarities. But I think also, just to explain about the wall, so Ireland, the island of Ireland, the north and south of Ireland, do not want a wall for there to be a border between the 2 countries. But Ireland, as in the south of Ireland, is in the EU and remaining in the EU, and the north of Ireland is with the UK and not remaining in the EU. We are Brexiting and they're Brexiting with us. So the issue of a wall is quite an interesting one, because the Brexit negotiations have completely failed on the issue of that wall in Ireland, and I just think that was quite interesting.
Well, it's fascinating. I mean, that this mirroring is happening. And, which is it causing all of these things, the astrology? or is it just reflecting all of these things?
Well, I'll just, for those, I know some of the listeners do understand a little bit of astrology, so what I will do, I'll just explain that the 1776 chart for the USA has an ascendant, so a rising sign in Sagittarius, 12 degrees of Sagittarius. The UK, this 1922 chart, has a rising sign of Gemini at 9 degrees of Gemini. So we've got flipped over ascendant descendant. So if this was a couple, we would say it was a marriage made in heaven. The similarities are amazing. The UK's Sun and Mercury are sitting on the USA's ascendant. The moon, for instance, in the UK at 23 degrees of Cancer, and the USA's Mercury at 24 degrees of Cancer, they're so close that when Pluto and Saturn have their exact hit in January at 23 degrees of Cancer, something will happen to both countries. We'll experience very similar stuff. And I'm wondering if it's this treaty. I think I understand it, that if we come out of the Brexit, which we will do apparently at the end of October, then I guess it's about how the UK and the USA suddenly get this treaty going on, and that's it. Then we'll have all your GMO crops, and then you'll have our lamb.
As long as America doesn't get the national health system of Britain. This reminds me back, when it all first began in 2016. And who was it? One wag said, it's time that we made America Great Britain again.
Made America Great Britain again. So you mean make us another state of the USA? This could happen.
No. Make America a state of the United Kingdom.
Oh, right. Okay. Do you know what I always find fascinating, Sandie? When you go abroad and you're there in Greece or something, and for us, we hear an American accent, don't we? And we always turn around and go, oh, Americans, and start to giggle, oh, Americans. And I do notice that Americans, if they hear me talking, go, oh, you're English, British. I think they always say British. There is a fascination that goes on between our countries. Our accents fascinate each other, don't they? So I think there's a lot ready to, I think there's a lot to come.
Well, let's hope it's not a fatal fascination. So let's talk about Brexit and the US presidential election that's looming next year. Have you peeked ahead to see what's going to happen there?
The problem I've got with that at the moment is that the Democrats haven't, there's no clear opponent in the Democrats, is there? I mean, I'm trying to sort out, okay, I'm English, but I'm looking at it and I think, and I can't see who their representative is going to be. So all I could do was look at Donald Trump's chart and just turn the radio down now. If you don't want to hear the next 2 minutes of what I think, just come back in a minute or so. If Donald Trump, and I'm going to really emphasize this, if Donald Trump does go into that election next year, November the 3rd, is it? His chart has a lot of success in it. There's a lot of self-congratulatory success. Now, I don't know if he will be the candidate because there's so much going to happen between now and then. It'd be like saying Sandy Sedgbeer will stand. So I've no idea if he will stand. But if he does stand, if he goes in for that election, his chart is very successful on that day.
Yeah, but come on, Alison. I mean, here is a man who congratulates himself every day, regardless of what he does.
Well, let's say the planets are supporting him on that day. I think from memory, he's got Mars opposite his Jupiter, and he's got transiting Saturn trine his midheaven. Honestly, this is a chart where you would look at something and say, yeah, this looks good.
And let's not forget, he's got that 29 degrees Leo. You know, isn't it that royal kind of something or other? The same thing I've got in my chart as well.
Yeah.
Is that going to help him?
I think everything is looking that along with other things. There's quite a lot in his chart that is working for him. I think the biggest one is the Saturn trine to his midheaven. That it delivers status, it delivers success, it delivers material benefits. So it would be. It depends whether or not he stands. If he stands, his chart looks successful. That's all I can say.
Okay. Well, I'll concede that certainly he's got status and he seems to have the material success. As for the rest of it, well, it really depends on how you look at those. But let's move on and talk about some of the other aspects that you have highlighted for 2020. You talk about family dynamics and parenting.
Yeah.
Say a little bit more about those.
Yeah, big stuff, big stuff. Well, to start with, this is an excellent time to explore your family ancestry online. I think there is a big website that you can join, ancestry.com or something or other, but any of them will do. This is an absolutely excellent time to find your ancestors, wherever they are all over the globe, get in touch, start swapping photographs. It will be a really interesting project to take on now, so there's a positive to start straight away. But also what should be happening is you should find that buried family sensitivities are coming to the surface. This is a great time to have those conversations, the ones that you've never had with your mother, the ones that the things that you didn't ever dare say to your father, the talking to your siblings in a way that you never have before. It's a great time to bring all this stuff up, to dredge it up, because the Cancer-Capricorn axis, where everything is happening, represents the sensitivity of the family versus the authority and hardship of the family. So it's a really, really great time to go back over things. I have had lots of clients recently who are bringing to me issues to do with parents and children, and I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. It really is working. So if this is coming up, I think the thing to do is don't bury it. Don't turn it away. Don't turn down the opportunity of saying to your mother, Mum, can I talk to you about blah-de-blah-de-blah-de in whatever year? I think it's an excellent time to go into it. Don't be scared of doing that, because there could be quite a few revelations. I think also something else that people can do, go back to 1982-83, because we last had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 92-83. So have a look what happened then, and you'll find echoes of it in the year ahead.
Okay. Well, you know, if there's going to be a focus on family and children next year, I really hope, and I'm sure our listeners are with me here, that something gets resolved about this incredibly awful situation that's happening with the children that are being detained and their families. So let's just, put out some positive energy in that direction.
Yeah, I think people need to understand, actually, another thing, as each year passes at the moment, I see a greater intensity and ability for us to tap into the invisible unconscious collective. We have more and more power at our disposal, and I think what we need to understand is that we are part of the cosmos in our small way. Whatever happens in our brains has a resonance on Pluto. No matter how small that resonance might be, the electromagnetic connection is real. And I think anything we can do to help and assist the cosmos with its issues to do with children and parents and that kind of thing is not lost. I think it's absolutely part of the program and part of our the part that we're taking in this, that we're playing in this. We're not isolated from those children, and they're very much part of what's happening. Those images, even if we haven't got our own children, those images are striking a chord when we turn the news on, and that is giving us our own experience of children and authority versus the sensitivity. In this case, the authority is Capricorn, and that is what is impinging on the sensitivity of the family structure, and it's causing loss. I mean, Saturn can cause loss.
Well, and, let's not forget that the children are our most important asset. And these children in particular are going to grow up. And how are they going to grow up having had experiences like this in their past? Look ahead 20 years and there may be very good reason, to think harder about what we did to them and how it comes to affect them. Okay, so that was an overview of next year, and I know you're going to come back at the end of the year, and by then Boris may have delivered Brexit or not, and Trump may be in the run-in or not, but we'll look at a little bit closer at that then. Since I've got you here now, in the last few minutes, we've probably got about 7-8 minutes, tell us a little bit about the rest of this year and this month in particular.
Okay, so I think what we need to be bearing in mind is that we need to be working on our individual projects. Now, let's say, for instance, you've been looking at or thinking about selling your house. I think now is an absolutely real time, the realistic time to say, right, I'm going to do this. Instead of sitting there and thinking, yeah, I'll do it next year. No. Get on with it now, because you absolutely have at your disposal the most incredible energy for material change. And I think anything we can do to hone it, to expand it, to make it smarter, better, more fit for the future, of greater value, this is the time. Because, okay, Saturn does cause loss, but it causes loss of the things that aren't fit for the future. Pluto right alongside of Saturn is a very generative energy, very magical, and great potential to take things on to what they must become. So Pluto says we should evolve into what you must become. So if you sell your house, you'll find that magically everything sort of works out in all the right order, and then you'll find that magically you're able to buy the house of your dreams, the one that you wanted to move to. All right, if it's not about property, then think about anything really. So a car, any material things that have value to you. This is about the material. It's about the structures and the infrastructures and the things that make you feel secure. So I think it's a time for really focusing and concentrating on where your money is, where you bank. Think about where, is this the right sort of deposit? Is this the right bank? It's really time to get to grips with those kind of things. Don't put them off. So to bring them onto the table now and work with them, because it is a time of great potential for these things. But it's also a time when if you don't get it right now, then there's no point in later thinking, oh no, I wish I'd done that. Well, do it now. This is the most. The other thing I think people need to think about is Eris energy. So at the moment, there is great challenge and great sort of fiery collision energy in the atmosphere. And I think it's worth a word or two just talking about that. If you get challenged, if somebody seemingly is very unfair, very horrible or cynical or challenges you in an awful way, I think what you need to do is don't get into arguments. Don't get into retribution, because you'll sap the energy which you could use to drive yourself forward. And if you do that, if say somebody cuts you up at a corner in your car and shouts at you angrily and you think, well, that was so unfair. When you get home, don't waste time thinking of how you're going to report that man to the police, whatever. Use the energy that you feel, the anger that you feel, to sit down and channel it or divert it into a project of your own. Take yourself forward. Focus on yourself the whole time. Don't get sidetracked into having arguments with other people, because you won't get anywhere, but you would have got loads done if you'd have just focused on yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, harness the energy. I want to go back to the opener where we talked, we used the analogy of the three-act play. And, the structure of a three-act play, the first act sets things up. The second act is generally the longest act, and it usually has two scenes. And in the first one, the protagonists are scrambling hard to restore their equilibrium and put their world back to rights. But of course, each time they get close to victory, the tables get turned and it gets snatched away. Victory does not occur and cannot occur until we get to the closing act. So, if we had to look at the next few years ahead as a three-act play, we're about to go into scene 1 of Act 2. When will scene 2 of Act 2, manifest itself, and where, when can we expect to see some kind of closing act on all of this?
Where are we going? Do you know, Sandie, I do sometimes think about this, and what I see is planets in the sky that are ceaseless. They never stop. We never get the same pattern of planets again, ever. They're only occur this one time. The odds on them all being in the same place again are impossible. So for me, it's always an unfolding, but it's an unfolding in the spiral. So we get back to the same place, but we see it from a different perspective this time because we're wiser and we know more. So I think we just have to keep going and not expect to understand that much more into the future. I think, we get a limited view in astrology. Some big outer hitters get into an aspect that is going to last a few years, and so we can make a prediction on that. But I think in general, it's always about, as far as I'm concerned, being fairer, getting more acceptance of diversity, being kinder to the planet, less geared into growth, so that, because at the end of the day, all growth can lead to is a complete depletion of planetary resources. So I think it's about getting more balanced. So for me, that's what Act 2 and 3 and 4 lead to. It's all about, I don't know where. Eventually, I hope it's into space travel, and I hope it's getting out on other planets. But for me, it's living in the now.
Well, it's all we've got, isn't it? The now.
Yeah, but what a fabulous thing we have got, to just expand on what we've got at the moment is brilliant. I mean, I am actually listening to my own advice here. I am actually selling my house.
Okay. Well, Alison, thanks for joining us today. Good luck with the house move. And
thank
we'll
you.
See you back here at the end of December.
End of December. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, Sandie. It's great to talk to you, and I hope everybody out there has a fabulous end of the year.
Thanks very much. Alison Chester-Lambert is the author of 3 groundbreaking books on astrology and of the best-selling astrology reading cards. For more information on her work, her books, her cards, and her private consultations, which are remarkably cheap, by the way, visit AlisonChesterLambert.com. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.